So the 1983 NHL entry draft had a lot of drama. There were some big American picks with Brian Lawton, Pat LaFontaine at the front of the draft. European players were getting more highly considered, especially the Russians, in their later rounds. But what happened to the St. Louis franchise in the offseason and disallowed them from making their picks in this draft is sort of the lost history lesson of the Blues, and it put them behind by about 3 or 4 years in the what do you call the Western Conference Wars. Now, the 50th NHL entry draft in Montreal made history because of something that didn't happen as well as something that did. For the first and only time in NHL history, an NHL franchise chose not to participate in the draft. The Blues, who were in the middle of a dispute with the NHL over the pending sale of the team to move them to Saskatchewan, chose not to send any representatives to Montreal. It was perhaps the most bizarre development and one of the most bizarre sagas in NHL history. Now, St. Louis ownership crisis dated back to the middle of the 83 season when the food company Ralston Purina, the team's owner since 77, said it wanted to get out of the hockey business and sell the team to a group from Saskatoon. The Saskatoon group, known as Coliseum Holdings Limited, was run by former Edmonton Oilers WHA owner Bill Hunter. Coliseum Holdings were prepared to buy the Blues for $11.5 million. Yes, $11.5 million, a price that more than satisfied Ralston Purina. The other NHL owners, however, were uncomfortable with the notion of a team leaving the States for a much smaller Canadian market. In addition, St. Louis Mayor Vincent J. Schomel Jr. vowed that he would never let the Blues leave his city and mounted a vigorous campaign to find local ownership. Knowing that the NHL would support any other bid to keep the team in St. Louis, Schomel said he was working with a group of investors who would make the minimum $3 million offer to Ralston that NHL governors needed to block the Saskatoon sale. He later increased the offer to $8 million, and Ralston recognized it was going to have a tough time getting its way. Despite growing opposition, Ralston Purina sold the Blues to Hunter's Group after the 83 season ended in April of that year. The sale was subject to NHL approval, and the league was determined to block it if Schomel delivered on his promises. Most of the Blues players openly opposed the move. President and GM Emile Francis was so unwilling to relocate, they asked Ralston Purina to release him from his contract, due to expire on June 30th, 83. On April 27, Schomel announced his group could not come up with the money, but he would not concede defeat until the NHL vote. Ralston Purina and Bill Hunter both mocked the mayor, saying it would never make it on time. On May 3rd, 83, confirming its determination to carry through on the Saskatoon deal, Ralston Purina let Francis out of his contract to become president and GM of the Hartford Whalers, which almost led him to a Stanley Cup in 86. Now, 10 days after Francis left, on May 13, 83, Ralston Purina shut down the Blues offices, dismissing everyone in the organization except a small handful of remaining senior management and scouts. However, on May 18th, the NHL hit back, rejecting the Blues' sale to Hunter's Group by a 15-3 vote. Now, we were not sure the 3 people that voted for it, but we know for sure probably Winnipeg said yes. On May 24th, Ralston Purina filed a $20 million lawsuit against the NHL. All owners who voted against her abstained, and President John Ziegler claiming they had denied the company its right to sell the team. The NHL retaliated with a $78 million countersuit for dissolving a franchise without permission. Despite the animosity, the remaining members of the Blues staff said they would attend the draft on June 8 and would proceed as they would play in 83-84. Now, on May 31st, 83, the Saskatoon group cut its commitment to the sale, leaving Ralston Purina with no buyer. On June 7, 83, angry Ralston Purina executives said the Blues would boycott the NHL draft and the team would be tendered to the NHL, which could try to find a buyer while Ralston pursued its suit. The NHL could not decide what it wanted to do with the Blues before the draft, and as a result, nobody spoke for the team on draft day. On June 13, 83, learning Ralston Purina would liquidate the team's assets if the NHL did not agree to its settlement, the NHL finally took over the Blues. By August, the league was able to sell the team to California businessman Harry Ordess for the bargain basement price of $3 million, and the franchise was safe in St. Louis. $3 million in 83 money. The scar of a missing draft, however, remained for years. At the time, it didn't appear the 83 draft would be a very bad one to miss. There were a few blue-chip defensemen available, and top forwards such as Pat LaFontaine, Alfie Turcotte, and Dave Gagner were all considered too small to be guaranteed stars in the league. The overall 83 aspirations were so low, in fact, that Minnesota gambled and made a bit of draft history by taking Rhode Island high school player Brian Lawton with the first pick, ahead of future Hall of Famers Pat LaFontaine and Steve Yzerman. That bold decision by North Star GM Lou Nanne gave Lawton the distinction of being the first American-born player ever taken number one overall. Although other Americans went number one in subsequent years, Lawton remains the only high school player taken number one overall. 4 picks later, at number 5, another American made history when Tom Barrasso became the first U.S. high school goaltender to be selected in the draft's first round and eventually won cups in Pittsburgh and made the Hall of Fame. Other big news was made toward the end of the draft, like I noted before, when some teams gambled by taking high-profile Soviet stars, such as Vladislav Tretiak, Montreal, Alexei Kasatonov, and Sergei Makarov. Makarov taken by Calgary. Vyacheslav Fedosov was also drafted for a second time in '83 after being taken 5 years earlier. Soviet players were considered risky picks because the USSR was controlled by the then communists, now capital communists, who were unlikely to let their players earn a living in North America. The same was true for communist Czechoslovakia, which is why nobody cared much about Chicago's late-round decision to draft Czech goalie Dominik Hasek, who at the time was considered unlikely to ever play in the NHL. Now, in this draft, all North American amateur players born between January 1st, 63 and September 65, and all European players born before September 15, 65, were eligible. Non-playoff teams had the first 5 picks and drafted in reverse order of their '83 finish. The 16 playoffs teams then drafted in reverse order of their 1982-83 finish. That meant the Islanders had the final pick. St. Louis did not participate in the draft. His first 2 picks were exercised by teams that had already traded for them. St. Louis passed on all 10 of its picks from rounds 3 through 12. Now the rotation was Pittsburgh, Hartford, New Jersey, Detroit, LA, St. Louis, Toronto, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Calgary, Quebec, New York Rangers, Buffalo, Washington, Minnesota, the Islanders, Montreal, Chicago, Edmonton, Philadelphia, and Boston. Now there was 12 total rounds, and the NHL did pay a lump sum to the CMJHL to support major junior hockey as a whole. The NHL teams also negotiated fees with individual European teams for the release of European players. Now, teams could only offer player contracts at any time after the draft. However, underage players would be required to begin the '83-'84 season with their major junior teams if they did not make their NHL teams out of camp, and it will only be available for emergency recall. I think it was 5 to 8 games at the time. So again, Brian Lawton, number 1, 113 players taken that made the NHL, almost 50%. 21 players won the Stanley Cup at 8.7%. Most NHL games was Yzerman, 1453. Most playoff games was Claude Lemieux, 233. Highest pick to miss was number 35, Todd Francis, and the lowest pick to reach the Mr. Irrelevant or close enough to it, Bo Berglund. 242 players were drafted, 124 forwards, 86 defensemen, and 22 goalies. So we look at the rough stats, and we're going to go around the horn, round 1 and round 2, just to give you a better indication what happened. Lawton by Minnesota, Sylvain Turgeon-Pierre by Hartford, LaFontaine by the Islanders, number 3, then Yzerman, Barrasso, John McLean, New Jersey, Russ Courtnall to Toronto, Andrew McBain with Winnipeg, Cam Neely with Vancouver, Normand Lacombe with Buffalo, Adam Creighton with Buffalo, Rangers Dave Gagné, Calgary Dan Quinn, Bobby Dolis with Winnipeg, Bob Erie with Pittsburgh, Gerald Diduck with the Islanders, Alfie Turcotte, of course, the big prospect, Montreal took him, Bruce Cassidy, Jeff Bukaboom with Edmonton, David Jensen with Hartford, and Nevin Markwart with Boston. Now, in the second round, Tal Charlesworth, Pittsburgh, Willie Sirin, Hartford, Sean Evans, New Jersey, Lane Lambert, Detroit, Claude Lemieux, and Momesso back-to-back, 26-27, Jeff Jackson, Toronto, Brad Berry, Winnipeg, David Bruce, Vancouver, John Tucker, Buffalo, Yves Haroux, Quebec, Randy Heath, Rangers, Richard Heju, Buffalo, Todd Francis, Montreal, Mal Parks, Minnesota, Garrett McKechnie, not McKechnie, but McKechnie, Francisek Musil, Minnesota, then Wayne Presley, Mike Golden, Peter Zazel, and Greg Johnson. So in the round 3, Taglianetti was taken, Bobby Probert by Detroit, Alan Bessler by Toronto, Brian Bradley was in the second round, Perry Berzin, Mitch Messier, the brother of Mark, and you had a bunch of, third or fourth line players. Ironically, ladies and gentlemen, John Cordick was taken 78 overall in the fourth round, so it was a very successful draft by Montreal that year. So the idea about the draft, ladies and gentlemen, there seemed to be an indication that they thought maybe nobody was going to be really what do you call a big factor, but I think that was an error. But and you know what's kind of interesting here, ladies and gentlemen, lot of trades before the draft. Now Lawton showed up in Minnesota with a trade with Pittsburgh, and Barrasso came to Buffalo in the Rick Martin deal. And again, John McLean because of the Rob Ramage deal. Norman Lacombe with the Don Edwards deal. Adam Creighton came to Buffalo because of the Tony McKechnie deal. And it was pretty weird as it went. Now, Montreal had traded Rick Chartrand to LA for Claude Lemieux, while Guy Lapointe was traded for the pick that got Meso. So a very interesting way how it played out. Now the idea, ladies and gentlemen, about drafts, there's always a connection in some way to key drafts. And Montreal was either dumping or bringing in number one draft picks at the time. And the 83 draft led to the 86, 89, and 93 Cup directly and indirectly. But for me, the interesting thing is that Hartford took Sylvain Turgeon. And that was something that was unexpected. And Turgeon played a big factor again in Hartford's resurgence because they were getting away from the Davy Keon defensive style. But I think the big steal of their draft, number 4, number 5, Arjun and Barrasso. I mean, but Vancouver for Cam Neely, boys, that was pretty freaky. And just to put this in perspective, ladies and gentlemen, he had scored 129 goals in the last 2 seasons. And, of course, he won the Memorial Cup with Portland and was the leader in the playoffs that year. So easily Hartford could have taken him, anybody else. But I think Vancouver still traded him, so he still underrated him. So you can imagine getting some of his talents at number 9, which should have been a number 1. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the story of the 1983 draft where St. Louis really got the blues. If you like what we're doing here with our NHL Draft Historical Podcast, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share. And don't forget, requests are highly accepted, highly anticipated, and highly, highly considered. Keep your stick in the ice. Bye.